Hello. Wow, we're really excited to see so many of you here today. It's really great. Thank you so much for coming out. Today we're going to talk about the power of the media when it comes to the Middle Eastern conflict. We have with us some fantastic guests. We have Ahmed Alkhatib, all the way from Gaza, but now lives in Washington. And with him, another friend, Vatanka, from Iran, but now also lives in Washington. And all the way from Oslo, we have Hanne Skartveit, our favorite media person. Seriously? Because it's going to be a conversation, a free-floating conversation. And our organization is called Chaos and Chaos. So to make it less chaotic, Hanne is going to lead the conversation. Just so you know, it's a conversation. It's not the moderator. She's just going to lead it. And this would not have been possible without the fantastic partnership we have with the Oslo Freedom Forum. And now let's rock and roll.
I'm not in order to call you out, Louisa, but I got the message that I was going to lead this conversation half an hour ago. So I'm going to pay by ear, as we call it, and I'm going to take part in the conversation. At the same time, I'm trying to keep an order between the three of us. I hope you're not too untidy people. We shall see. So the media coverage of the whole Middle East. Let's start with a very open, wide question. How has it been in your eyes? Iran first, and the whole conflict there?
Well, thank you. First, thanks very much to the organizers for bringing me here. My son, Martin, was half Norwegian, so he's always happy to be back in Norway. But to your question, so I left Iran about 40 years ago. And I can tell you for sure, vast majority of Iranians in Iran and in the diaspora have been waiting for a moment similar to what we've seen in the last 6 months in terms of the possibility of a big political change in Iran. I hope we get into it, the nature of the regime. I don't say this as an advocacy person. I'm an analyst, and I speak as an analyst. And as an objective analyst, I'm pretty sure that people of Iran really have had enough with the Islamic Republic. But, and there's a big but, President Donald Trump did not have a plan when he went to this war. He had hope. He didn't have a strategy. And it's showing. And I think, again, as someone who became an American citizen 12 years ago as a taxpayer, I have two different hats. I put on that Iranian hat, I wish Iran was free tomorrow. And then I look at it as an American taxpayer, what are we doing? Another endless war in the Middle East for what purpose? Where is this going? How is it helping the Iranian people? And one of the worst things I've seen with this war is the United States' credibility is suffering. It's not too late. The United States is a big power still. I don't care what people say, technologically, militarily, diplomatically. If the US gets its act together, it can still move things around. And I think that's a good thing for Europe, for countries like Norway. Some of us who live in Washington, D.C. believe in the transatlantic partnership. I'm a big believer. Some of us, not everybody. I'm a beneficiary of it. I mean, just very quickly, I'm born in Iran, grew up in Denmark. So I can test your Danish later if you want. So I haven't personally benefited from it. And I don't like it when the American president talks about taking Greenland or hurting Spain. Anyway, long story short, I think where we are in terms of the Middle East right now is we need American leadership. We need an American leadership to find a way to get the United States out of this war one way or another. And again, we can talk about what the options are. But my big lesson from the last 6 months has been that you cannot go to war on a hope. You need to bring your experts in. And that's another thing I would leave you with. This idea that you don't need experts, people that study countries. You don't need that. Who cares that? That just slows down I don't believe in that. I really do believe there's a value in expertise, because if you get the right expertise, you'll get the right decisions, hopefully.
And the media coverage, has that reflected the real situation on the ground and also in Washington? I mean, do we give the right image of what's actually going on?
So let me tell you, one of the most remarkable things about this war has been how unpopular this war was from get-go. Today, it's about 28% of Americans who support this war. And traditionally in American history, if you read history, Americans rally around the flag. The countries at war, Iraq war, Afghanistan campaign, so forth. Here, it starts at very low level and continues to going down because of what I said. The clarity of mission wasn't there. What are we trying to do? Iran wasn't a threat. The regime is nasty, sure, but they weren't attacking us. They weren't threatening us. And the president has never articulated anything that looks like a clarity. And the media are obviously, by and large, going where the public sentiment is, right? And they're expressing public sentiment. So I wouldn't say the media has been unfair at all. President thinks they are fake news and they're unfair. I don't think so. I think they're actually doing their job, which is to ask the tough questions when it comes to something that's consequential of why you're taking this country to war, where Americans dying, and we still haven't paid for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. $40 trillion in debt. You know, you can't keep having war after war and not knowing what you're doing with it. And that's where freedom of press is so important, to ask those tough questions of your elected officials.
I think you're going to a different landscape now, because when we write about Iran, it's not, I mean, some people always get mad, but not as many. But when we write about the Middle East, about the war in Gaza, people are angry from all sides. And how do you see the press coverage? I mean, you're yourself from Gaza, you've been following this very closely. You've been very critical against Hamas. You've been experienced a lot of rough things during those 3 past years.
Certainly. And I want to just start by saying that I am speaking here as Ahmed. I'm not speaking on behalf of all Palestinians. I'm not speaking for the Palestinian view. But actually, that is a central point that I hope you take away from this thing. For like the past 3 years, you've been bombarded with, this is the Palestinian view. This is the Palestinian narrative. And the Palestinian view is, well, what is that? Is it the people in Gaza? Is it the people in the West Bank? Is it East Jerusalem, people in Israel? Is it the Palestinians in the refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan? Is it the Palestinians in Europe? Is it the very different Palestinians in the United States? So don't let anybody fool you into thinking that there's this singular Palestinian narrative, because unfortunately what we've seen, and this is partly the creation of the media coverage, and the media itself will define it. Are we talking traditional media? Are we talking this new mode of hybrid social media? Are we talking citizen journalists out of the Gaza Strip? Are we talking people resharing? Are we talking social media influencers and personalities? But the media has been bombarding you with what you're supposed to conform to as, this is the Palestinian view. So what is the Palestinian view? Just making it vary for the sake of time and whatever, for just specific to the last 3 years. Well, October 7th was the inevitable result of 1948, 80 years of Nakba, 80 years of Israeli occupation, displacement, white settler colonialism, these Zionist Jews coming from Europe and taking over. And that's why October 7th happened. October 7th is because Israel just locked Gaza in and just besieged them and never wanted the Palestinians to develop. And you can pick out nuggets of information, of threads of, maybe you could call them truths, half-truth, maybe you can call them themes. But I'm sorry, October 7th happened because two psychopaths, Sinwar and Deif, decided to take Gaza hostage and basically unleash a suicidal, nihilistic project that brought upon the worst catastrophe on the Palestinian people in modern history. Does that, and so that is one dimension of it. Then you have the unleashing of a whole host of, there's narratives, there's sub-narratives, and then there's counter-narratives. What we've seen, unfortunately, and I identify as very pro-Palestine. And part of that is I want to actually rebrand and reimagine what it means to be pro-Palestine. We've seen this idea of the resistance narrative. become something that's very popularized through a lot of media, through a lot of journalists, through a lot of academia, social media, regular journalists being confused, and then regular journalists and media having to respond to the popular emerging trends. People were calling what's happening in Gaza a genocide on October 8th. Israel hadn't even gotten rid of all the Hamas guys that were in. Why am I saying that? Am I saying that in defense of Israel? No, it's not my job to defend Israel. I'm simply saying that there were very potent, powerful forces that immediately went in. And then when we, Palestinians who were against Hamas, who want an end to the occupation, who want equality, who want not just liberation from the Israeli military occupation, and I always say military occupation, because to some people, all of Israel is occupation. And they talk about the dismantle, the Zionist entity. We spoke about it in the car, that's a forever war, that's a state that's never going to be achieved. I am a very radically pragmatic guy. I believe in two states, two nations living side by side. And so there are many Palestinians who felt that there was global attention to Gaza in particular, but to Israel and Palestine through the media, through the Israeli onslaught afterwards. And instead of capturing that and directing it in a very productive, meaningful way, we saw the emergence of people being drunk on social media relevance and power, people basically, not everybody who's pro-Palestine, people normalizing Hamas and the armed resistance narrative, people proclaiming that the only solution is river to the sea, dismantle Israel, etc. So that's my critique of the media in a nutshell, just for this part of the question, is that it enabled people who know very little about the conflict, or Palestinians in the diaspora who are often driven by emotion, to be much more reactive than proactive. It enabled a lot of people to fail to harness the power of the moment and the attention to the Israel and Palestine conflict. And let's actually double down on two states. Let's double down on the West Bank settlements have to stop and the settler. Let's make it very tangible, specific. And instead, I was like, hey guys, let me tell you, I just published a book 2 weeks ago, a short book called Hamas and its 2 million hostages. And unfortunately, and I'll stop here, 3 years after October 7th, we just had in the United States, Pew Research, which is the most prestigious survey house in the US, 44% of American Muslims came out and said they support Hamas. And that is, in my opinion, a very undercount. I think it's more like 70 to 80%. I go to hundreds of universities. I've gone to mosques. I've gone into spaces, demonstrations, etc. I cannot go into a space, whether it's liberal, white, Europeans. I got punched in Norway here 2 years ago by a lady who thought that even though I'm wearing a Palestinian flag lapel, because she thought from a distance that I was an Israeli because we were talking about the topic with 4 friends, and she came and punched me. And she's a blonde Norwegian woman, and she's like, we're only pro-Palestine in this bar, and we don't want no Zionists anymore. So this is what I'm talking about, is that the derangement is, I think, the product, unfortunately, of the media narrative.
It's been a very toxic debate with very narrow. I mean, it's only one thing you can mean on both sides, basically. And if you look at the Iranian diaspora, they have it's so many different opinions, so many different groups. It's very easy to find sources that mean different things. While on the Palestinian side, I mean, you're one of the few who really challenge the Palestinian narrative within Gaza. It's impossible. We have seen those who try to protest. It's really big trouble for them, for life, actually. So what to do as a media organization when I was interviewing Salam Fayyad back in 2009, I think. He was really a wonderful technocrat, wanted to build a state. It was something going on. And then the Palestinian leadership has just deteriorated, and it's both in the Gaza and on the West Bank. So to be a journalist in this and to try to cover, for instance, the inside of the Palestinian leadership, what's going on there, is very difficult.
Certainly. I'll just briefly say that, I mean, look at what happens to me. Okay, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I'm a privileged man. I got out of Gaza. I have U.S. citizenship. I'm very blessed. I'm very blessed. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. But I, unfortunately, have and continue to pay a very, 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 very high price for what I'm saying. Not only is the FBI constantly involved in my life in terms of safety, not only do I have to carry guns with me in many places in the United States, but I'm talking about the social barrier. I've talked to so many Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims who tell me, thank God someone else is saying what we know is true, but we have a hard time saying ourselves. There's a high degree of conformity and a high degree of enforced cohesion that is enabled by the media on one side, and excuse me, I know we're very Norwegian here, but a lot of the white, left-leaning, liberal, European, American social justice types that mean well. Their heart is in the right place. But of course we should be outraged by the slaughtering of children in Gaza. I lost 34 of my immediate and extended family members. Israel destroyed both of my childhood homes. I'm deaf in my left ear from an Israeli bombing that almost killed me, killed 2 of my friends. I don't need someone to lecture me on the brutality of life under occupation, etc. But when I then counter that with, we had an opportunity in 2005, I've gone to university, and I speak about 2005, I don't care what Ariel Sharon had, that was an opportunity to turn the Gaza withdrawal of settlements. We are against the military occupation. Okay, fine. Israel pulled out of Gaza, the occupation continued in another way, that's fine. But we got rid of the direct military occupation. That's an opportunity to build Gaza into a role model for what an occupation-free West Bank can and should look like. We want to demonstrate to Israelis, we want to demonstrate to the American people, we want to demonstrate to the whole world. This is what we can do if given a chance to a fair opportunity at freedom and emancipation. That's why I use the word freedom. I don't like the word liberation, because the word liberation means that we can be liberated from Israel's military occupation, but a fascist ISIS-like terrorist organization like Hamas can take over, and then, oh, that's resistance. That's okay. I don't want to be liberated from or somebody like the Islamic Republic of Iran can get rid of, basically under the guise of Islamism. So that's where I go back to, there are thousands of Ahmeds, thousands of them, tens of thousands, in Gaza, in the United States, in Europe, who have a hard time with this because it is literally that difficult, number one, not just from a safety. Safety, yes, it's a big part of it, but there's no infrastructure. One of the things that's weird is Gazans in Gaza, they hate Hamas, they despise Hamas. They leave and they come to Europe and they are forcibly radicalized here in Europe because the infrastructure here doesn't exist to support Palestinians who are against the occupation, pro 2 states, pro a secular, liberal, democratic society. Some people will utter that as, I think, a lot of demonstrations, they'll say it. But if you really dig down, the overwhelming focus is on not just ending the occupation, but it is on Zionism, it's on settler colonialism, it's on highly charged words like apartheid, like genocide, which again, that's a whole other, is it apartheid, is it genocide, is it this, is it that? It's become a verbal purity test. And the media, in my opinion, has helped amplify that rather than actually promote the kind of discourse we need to dissect the complex threats. Today's world is very gray. There are no Palestinians who believe, and like the Palestinian people are extraordinarily diverse. You can't possibly believe that I'm just as a journalist, I'm just one of the few.
But it's harder to see the diversity in the Palestinian community than in the Iranian community. And if you try to see from Washington, why do I, as a journalist in Norway, get more hardship when I write about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than when I write about Iran? What's the explanation? I mean, it's both complicated, and it's both about religion versus politics. It's
Yeah, no, look, I don't want to for a second claim to be speaking as someone who follows the Arab-Israeli conflict as closely as Ahmed does, obviously. But let me just take a step back and answer your question slightly differently first, and then maybe I can tackle where the Iranians are. You know, I started in this field in 1999, and pretty much get-go in London when I would get, as an analyst, I'll get journalists to call me because I just spend that much more time following the subject matter. And I remember back then, 20-some years ago, the journalists will take their time to actually talk to me. You know, the 5-minute call didn't happen. It was they would take the time. These days, you get a journalist, and maybe there's no offense to anyone, but I'm saying there is become a trend that somebody sends you an email with 10 questions. Answer these questions. And I'm assuming they're sending the same email to another bunch of people. That is supposed to write your article. You're not going to write anything powerful that way, for sure. So my point in saying that is this: take your time. Learn the subject matter. Don't cut corners. You're not going to write something original doing it that way. Pick up the phone, speak to the person that you think has something perhaps to offer. That I think is really important. The other thing is be very careful whether you've been misled or not. That takes me to your question about the Iranian opposition. Look, Iran is a large country of 90 million people. There are hundreds of outlets, newspapers. Iran publishes a lot of books every year. And in the diaspora, you have even more. You got Persian language, English language, and in any country, I'm sure Norwegian, Danish, German. So there is a wealth of literature. It's not a country that's understudied. It's studied well. The question you have to be careful about is who's trying to mislead me? What are they telling me this piece of fact and not the other one? And that's really important. And that's why you talk to different sources. You get different angles. Otherwise, you're going to go in a certain direction. And I think it's partly also the problem that we have with politicians, certainly in the United States and in Europe. If you go to the European Union buildings in Brussels, you will see certain group of political actors from the Iranian opposition show up and knock on doors, and they get to dominate, even though oftentimes they're the most organized, but they're not necessarily the biggest voices. But because they're organized, they get the meetings in European Commission or the United States Congress. So when it comes to the media, just know all these realities. Make sure you're not being misled. I'm not going to speak as someone who defends any particular positions, but because you raised the issue of the Iranian opposition, the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah of Iran, obviously is very in the news, popular. And I was someone who in Washington, D.C. back in February, when I was being asked who could potentially lead this Iranian opposition. So look, I've invited him. He's come to my institute repeatedly. I've known him for years. I like him as a person. Do I think he's an organizer who can take Iran to another different story, different sets of answers perhaps? But the fact is, he was for a while denamed. And what did his organization do? He started calling others that didn't necessarily agree with him fully names. There were the nasty fights on social media. Oh my God. Maybe it's because I grew up in Denmark. I just don't do nasty fights. And if you believe in democracy, the first thing you want to do is start being nice to the guy you don't necessarily, or girl that you don't necessarily agree with. That's a good start. Practice democracy in your conversations and build on it. But we had the absolute opposite. We had fights. And if you look at the Iranian opposition today, there is total lack of trust in one another. Everybody's second guessing. Now, maybe they work for the regime. Maybe they're getting their bills paid by the Iranian embassy. And that to me is a major indictment what went wrong. I mean, I'm trying to answer both the media question, the state of the Iranian opposition in one go, but really what I'm saying is information, take the time, read the subject matter. We live in an era where people don't have time. Reading books is not, it takes too much time. I'd rather go flip through Instagram and who put it out there? Who put that 5-10 second cute video on Instagram, but it supposedly tells me everything I need to know. Doesn't exist. If you really want to know it, it takes effort. And it's old school effort. It's back to, read the material and ask the tough questions.
And a huge dilemma for the press is, for instance, we didn't get into Gaza, and Iran is also quite closed down now. To be able to report from societies where you don't get access and can't work freely as a journalist makes it so difficult.
Yeah.
Because you have to trust other people, and also the pictures. I mean, with all this AI and technology now, in my newspaper we did a very hard job to verify pictures to see, is this really from where they claim it is?
Yeah.
Is it the same thing? So the whole, both the speed with social media and also the techniques that now makes it much more difficult is a huge problem.
Right, absolutely. And because you remind me of something I wanted to say quickly, because we're talking about Iran and Gaza in isolation. For the love of God, let's not forget, right now we're in this multipolar world that soon is going to become United States and so-called authoritarian regimes, the Russia, the China, the Irans, the North Koreas of this world. And both of them are engaged daily in an information warfare, right? So what happens in Gaza, I remember early on seeing what the Chinese were doing in terms of what's happening in Gaza. Not looking only at what Israel was doing, saying Israel is allowed to do this because the United States allows Israel to do it. Because for them, the issue wasn't Israel. Israel's a small country of 9 million, but they want to weaken the United States in its image, particularly in the global south. The same thing with the Iran issue. So you have to also keep in mind that the likes of Russia and China are heavily involved. Even if you don't see their fingerprints everywhere daily, they have a mission which is to undermine the United States as the leader of the Western world, which by default means undermine the Western European liberal democracies.
And then we have the question, who's forming the narrative? As a member of the mainstream media, I mean, we feel that the influencers, the social media, all the bots, which is not even real persons, they are taking a lot of forming the narrative to people. I mean, it's not necessarily that people get so engaged. It's not necessarily because they read VGs, because they see all these pictures coming into their feed, and some of them are real, some of them are fake. Who's forming the narrative?
So one of the challenges, to add to your earlier point, you were asking, I've spoken early after October 7th. One of the things that motivated me to really put myself out there and do this is that I was extraordinarily turned off by the dehumanization, which is something that was happening both on the pro, and I put it in quotes because there's being pro-Palestine and then there's being pro-Palestine. And the same is true on the pro-Israel side. The pro-Palestine side with the dismissal of the horrors of October 7th, the suffering of the hostages, etc., the quote community, as I call them. But also on the pro-Israel side, there was a carte blanche dismissal of all Gazans as being Hamas. They're all terrorists. They all participated in October 7th. There was a kind of like this war drum roll that was getting people ready for this horrendous war that was about to happen. And I try to operate in the middle, not in the middle of the issue as far as like to hold capacity for the humanity of both. Then, as time went on, early, it was very clear how so many Gazans, I mean, you have to think of Gaza as like the opposition to Hamas. There are multi-tiered opposition to Hamas, whether it's Palestinians, the consequences of October 7th, the totality of the last 20 years of Hamas's rule, in which, did you know that Gaza over the last 20 years under Hamas, more aid and development money was spent in Gaza per capita than any other conflict zone in the world, okay, including this amazing country that we're in, spent more money. And I've met with some of your officials trying to plead with them to maybe consider alternative mechanisms that actually help the people and don't empower this NGO industrial complex. And they were like, no, don't you dare. We love UNRWA, we love the PA, we love the NGOs, and we just want to write endless checks and send them to Gaza. And so I swear it's ridiculous. Like, I love Norway, but like, come on, for God's sake. So the idea is like part of this NGO industrial this is another thing that the media doesn't get. The NGO industrial complex very much so enabled Hamas to be in charge for the last 20 years because Hamas was sanctioned. Hamas didn't have to go. So, but instead of Hamas realizing, oh crap, we can't actually govern Gaza. The UN and UNRWA and the Arabs and the Europeans and the US and USAID all came in and said, okay, well, we will take care of the people of Gaza. And Hamas was like, thank you very much. The money we get from Qatar and the Islamic Republic of Iran, we're going to build rockets, we're going to build tunnels, we're going to build terror infrastructure. So like, this is what I mean by misallocated humanitarian aid, misallocated development resources. They enable terrorism in the case of Gaza. And that's not rocket science. And I try to say that to journalists, and they're like, oh, are you against your own people? Ahmed, what's wrong with you? My dad, he ran UNRWA's largest clinic in northern Gaza. I know, I grew up in the UNRWA system. That's why my English is really well. Like, I'm not against UNRWA. UNRWA, once upon a time, was a very good system. But with Hamas control over 20 years, it got decimated. It got destroyed. Okay, so early on, I'll give an example. I won't give their name. I was speaking to a Wall Street Journal reporter, and I was hearing personally of so many Gazans, including sources that I said, I can connect them with you, who were like secretly saying, this is in December 2023, who were secretly saying, we hope Israel defeats Hamas. I don't want you to hear this and say, Ahmed stands with the war in Gaza, okay? Just deep breaths, everybody. The Gazans, these Gazans are so anti-Hamas that they for a second were like, you know what? This is horrendous. We're getting killed. We're getting bombarded. But maybe at the end of this, we'll be done with Hamas. Maybe. And that thinking changed. And I went to the Wall Street Journal and I published with them. But I wanted to write another piece, and I wanted to say Gazans are turning against Hamas. They're against, and I went to spoke to journalists, etc. And they were like, "Oh no, Gazan, Ahmed, we don't believe you. God is my witness. This is God," and I have it in email writing. No, Ahmed, we don't believe you. Gazans are with Hamas. And I was like, "No, I can connect you with some sources and blah blah blah." Well, how do we know you didn't pay them to say that? I was like, they're in the middle of war. They got bigger things to worry about than to speak to Wall Street journalists. And they were like, we need receipts. The media folks, they wanted to manufacture the narrative that all Gaza was Hamas.
Or to defend the journalist, when you cannot document something, you have to have facts.
How much more documentation do you need than talking to a live human about? And then let me tell you this. And then 2 weeks later, after this back and forth, and then the piece shut down, we didn't publish the piece, Bloomberg came out with an excellent piece in which they literally repeated the quote that I offered to the Wall Street Journal. And someone here, please, after this talk, fact check me. Go Google Bloomberg, Gaza, Hamas, basically from November to, I think it came out in December of 23, and in which it said, we hope, Gazans were secretly hoping, and Bloomberg talked to people, and they were secretly hoping that Israel defeats Hamas. Now, again, my point here is not to defend Israel. It's not to defend the war. It is not. But I have been desperate from the first days to try to break to forget academia, the pro-Palestine industrial complex, the politicians, just to the journalists, to say, it's hard enough, I know, you can't pick up the phone and call Gaza and be like, give me some anti-Hamas activists on the phone. You can't do that. They have to actually, but some journalists are either lazy or there's this confirmation bias. And it's like, no, I think they're all Hamas. And then fast forward, then we saw 2 massive bouts of demonstrations by Gazans under bombardment against Hamas. Then we saw the stupid polls that I said are fraudulent. Hamas is lying and is manipulating the polls. Again, I'm not here to defend the IDF, okay? The Israeli military killed a bunch of my family members. But the Israeli military itself, in August 2024, fact check me, released secret documents that it obtained in Gaza that showed how Hamas was manipulating the Shikaki polls, that are considered the gold standard. And it was showing how Hamas was correcting the polls that so many journalists that go, can you imagine going to Putin's Russia or Lukashenko's Belarus or going to North Korea right now and doing polls and saying, what do you think of the dear leader, of the supreme leader? What do you think of Putin? What do you think of Lukashenko? Like, in the middle of a war. So the IDF itself exposed how the population, Hamas actually overinflated in the polls, the amount of support they have. Okay, journalists, the same journalists, hello, hi, let me write a new piece for you. I don't want to name them because I'm right, but like big publications. Think the 3 biggest publications in America. And I was like, let me write a new piece. This is a massive discovery. And they were like, well, we can't trust the Israeli military because they discovered this. I said, yeah, but if I were the Israeli military, I would actually keep, like the Israeli military has an incentive to show all Gazans as being terrorists and being Hamas, whatever. So no, I believe the Israeli military here, even though I think Israel made a huge, a fatal mistake by not allowing journalists to go in. Israel lost the narrative, the media narrative, by not allowing journalists to go in. So that's yet another example of how the media landscape, and I'll stop, before I stop real quick, zooming out. So you've already, so what's the outcome of this? We have 2 outcomes. Number 1 is the entrenchment of narratives that were predetermined by the activist class, by the academic class. And then number 2 is that journalism, traditional media, I should say, journalism is a bigger umbrella. The media landscape is no longer relevant for the breakthrough of actual major mega stories, like, for example, the aid diversion of food during the hunger crisis in Gaza, that some went as far as saying it's widespread famine, some said it's malnutrition, some said whatever. There was overwhelming evidence of Hamas diverting the aid. My brother works on the ground, and I want to check to my brother, but he didn't give me any of the information. But my brother's in Gaza right now. I got his wife and 4 children out, but my brother is part of a major medical NGO, and I have an army of contacts. 10 years ago, I tried to build an airport in Gaza, an Israeli-approved airfield in Gaza, to facilitate freedom of movement in and out. And so there was overwhelming. You stop a child on the street of Gaza and you ask him, hello, is Hamas taking aid away from the necessary people? And the child will tell you, yes, uncle, Hamas is stealing all the aid. And then you call up the New York Times, the different bureaus, you call up the Wall Street Journal, you call up all these guys, and they're like, well, according to the UN, there's no evidence of any aid diversion. And then this is one part of the UN saying there's no evidence. And then the other part of the UN on their website, UNOPS, UN Office of Project Services, fact check me on this. During a time in 2025, the UN was showing how 75% of all aid going into Gaza was being unaccounted for.
But what you're saying is also illustrating how extremely complex it is with so many narratives going on. And it's an asymmetric warfare, is more and more in there. And who to trust also as a journalist? And we have to do fact checking much more than social medias, than different influencers. So it's not like we are lazy or don't believe certain people. I mean, it's very, very complex. And how to deal with that. And also, as I was mentioning, that the traditional media is getting weaker while all the influencers and all these flows of fake news and from different angles is taking so much space. What should we do?
I wish I could give you a good answer to
Please
this.
do.
I'm not in this media space as Ahmed is, but I definitely see the trend. I mean, as a consumer of news, I can see that the Tucker Carlsons of this world and Joe Rogans in this world in America, I'm sure you have the equivalent here in Norway, they are, big part of providing the analysis, the news that make people's minds up in many ways for them. I wouldn't necessarily go against the trend in terms of the new technological reality, new platform. That's what it is. It's not going to go anywhere. But if you believe in, I'm sure, again, you have an Arco here, we have PBS in the United States. There are still thorough journalistic activities out there where somebody puts in a half an hour, 45 minutes. I lived in England for 11.
Much more, I promise you. There are a lot of journalists putting on a lot of time to try to figure out what's going on.
And I think there are people who actually have the attention span to sit down and watch something they care about for 45 minutes or an hour. So, it's not that you give up, it's that you just find ways to come back and compete and not assume that the new generation is lost. In fact, again, just listening to some of the younger folks that I work with, there is also a backlash there that I want to be able to take the time to actually see something that's thoroughly researched and, journalistic output that is of old school, if you will. So I think there is a desire for it in the marketplace. The question is, how do you which subjects you choose. The other thing I would say is obviously the issue of money. I don't know how it is here in Norway, but in the United States, journalism has been massacred essentially as an industry. No doubt about it. You've got big newspapers and left, and the rest of them are certainly local newspapers are struggling. So it's not necessarily just a subject of the Middle Eastern conflict. There's a broader issue here that is impacting journalism.
And also we have in Norway, the political system is quite easy to understand, and it's not a very complex society compared to both Israel, Palestinian, and also the Iranians. The whole Middle East is very different than we used to. And as Western media, do we manage to fully understand what's going on?
I mean, again, when we talk about the Middle East, what Middle East are we talking about? For some people, Middle East starts in Morocco, ends in Afghanistan, Pakistan. For other people, Middle East is Egypt, and not even Iran. It's just the Gulf State. So which Middle East are we talking about? There are lots of ways of measuring and using different metrics. But I would say, when I get nervous when somebody has a business card that says Middle East expert. I get nervous. Okay, this is. I do one country and I'm not an expert on it. I observe it daily, and every day I know how little I know compared to yesterday. That's how I go about my business. But there are folks out there who are experts on a whole, continent of 500 million people. Choose your subject matter. Again, if I was in the journalistic field, not necessarily chase what people want to read, but also introduce ideas to them. Like in the case of Iran that I've studied, there are so many layers to Iranian society. You'll be amazed how complicated, to your point about complexities. You don't have to write an anti-regime piece to do a good journalistic piece on Iran. This same regime that I don't like, in many ways I'm a victim of, but again, as an analyst, sometimes I take a step back and I see things they have done that has been actually pretty impressive in certain areas. I should be able to say that. That doesn't mean I like the Islamic Republic, because I look at the totality of its track record. I'm not pleased with what they've done in the last 47 years. But there are certain things they've done, like, for example, girls' schools in Iran, 1979 compared to today. You can't compare it. Girls today are 60% of the university system in Iran. The boys are outclassed. Sorry, boys. But
same here, actually.
Yeah, right. So, how did that come about? Again, that might be not the sort of journalism we're talking about here, but again, it's the sort of research that I think will open windows into a soul of a nation, because it's so easy to engage in the black and white. Middle East, good, bad versus. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you are interested in complexities being unpacked, if you will, it just requires you to give it the bit of love and attention, and be patient with it. Don't assume the sort of fast burger delivery, if you know what I mean.
And do we see your conflict too much in the Western view? Do we manage to see the complexity?
Well, I think one of the challenges we forget that journalists are also human beings, and
thank you.
Like if they write a piece that's objective and very balanced and whatever, I've seen journalists that write these objective pieces, but the conversations I have with them beforehand tell me a ton about who they are as a human being They tell me, are they right-leaning? Are they left-leaning? There are journalists that, like, very much so, gush over me. And they're like, I love you so much, Ahmed, you're amazing, whatever, beforehand. And then they have to, like, be like, okay, now I'm going to put on my objective hat. And Ahmed, you need to tell blah, 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 blah. And then there are journalists that are like, okay, Ahmed, can you refer me to a regular pro-Palestine person? Because basically they think that I'm like an irregular pro-Palestine person. So like how patronizing and how disgusting, right? So that's on one angle. The other angle is like my interest in highlighting this is that I'm very frustrated in that journalists have, in the pre-publication level, they've become participants in narrative warfare. And that's where I see the danger. Because journalists are human beings and they're very influenced before they hit that send or that publish piece. And so when I give them what I believe is either overwhelming evidence or plenty of leads to follow on, their participation in a certain narrative, which is, again, you don't have to agree or disagree. Israel is doing genocide in Gaza, or Hamas is the representation of resistance in Gaza, or these university students are actually just legitimate pro-Palestine voices, or the pro-Palestine movement is very nonviolent, or the word intifada refers to a nonviolent uprising there, or you can be anti-Zionist but not be anti-Semitic. Fill in the blank. As a participant in, if you yourself take a very strong side as a human being, and then you attempt to decipher all of this complexity, as a journalist, this is where we run into problems, and this is where I worry that we're ceding a lot of space because journalists are not doing what I believe they should be doing on one hand. But then here's the other thing that I find bizarre and strange also, is that no matter how much some journalists participate in the narrative warfare, like every day on social media, I find at least one story in which I find a they can be pro-Palestine or the pro-Palestine, whichever side of those. And they're talking about how journalists have failed the people of Gaza, or journalists have not told. And at the same time, you'll find a pro-Israel person or a pro-Israel person talk about how journalists are anti-Semitic, or journalists are very unfair to Israel, or journalists are. It's like, I feel that journalists have gone above and beyond, in my view, in telling the Gaza story over the last 3 years. And that's not good enough for some people. And I feel that, to a certain extent, journalists have also tried their best working with a media blackout, working with very conflicting narratives coming out of the spokesperson unit from the Israeli military, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then the Prime Minister's office, and then you have Ben Gvir and Smotrich and those fascists coming out with their, the disgusting statements and saying, we're gonna expel the people of Gaza, or we want to starve them, or whatever. It's like, all things considered, journalists, I think, have done as best as they could trying to tell the Israeli official narrative, if you will. So that's not the issue. But my concern is that because neither side feels content with what journalists have done, I worry about journalists trying to overcompensate by being even more aggressive participants in the narrative warfare.
I don't agree, but I think because we know when we write about those issues that people will get mad from all sides. Mm-hmm. And then you can think, okay, then maybe we did a pretty good job because people get mad. And you're right. I mean, journalists, we really try to balance as well as we can. We really try to look at the sources critically, to understand. But in this time of information warfare, it's very, very complicated.
So we haven't defined, though, who qualifies as a journalist nowadays. So for example, I break a ton of like stories from like sources in Gaza. That like I don't aspire to be a journalist. I don't want to be a journalist, but people have called me a journalist. I don't know if you know these horrendous names, but is someone like, there are just some horrendous, I don't even want to dignify. There's some horrendous names on the pro-Palestine side on social media that are either writing news stories or like, are these journalists? Like, what from your perspective, I'm very curious, who is a journalist? Is it someone who works for a paper? Can I launch my own paper? Can I get a Substack and hire 3 people, and then I now become a journalist with a publication? What qualifies as a journalist?
Journalist is not a protected title. So in principle, yes, you can hire some people, and this is my journal, of course.
Yeah.
And that's both a good thing. It's democratically right, and it's also a problem in the sense that you when everyone calls himself a journalist, you also get the activist or the crazy people, or I think it's about people have to find the outlet that they trust. And I believe in this AI and social media time. Maybe this is our traditional media's opportunities to see people see that, okay, it's so much crazy thing going on there, so now we have to go to New York Times, BG, NRK, Wall Street Journal,
but
because
really,
you can trust them.
But is it really now actually the outlet that people trust, or the outlet that tells this, that makes people comfortable, that makes people feel safe? Like there's this horrendous guy, I will mention him by name, Ali Abu Nama. Ali Abu Nama, he launches, his website is called The Electronic Intifada. I mean, Jesus, right? And he's considered a preeminent pro-Palestine journalist. And like literally this guy is a jihadi who basically is like has personal preferences that he keeps to himself, and he wants to compensate. And that's why he's literally like pro-Hamas, like pro-resistance, and he's gone insane. And he's followed by millions of people around the world. Do we call him a journalist?
I wouldn't call him a journalist, but the thing is,
other people call him a journalist.
I know. And what to do about it? Nothing to do about it. I mean, there are crazy people out there in all kind of areas. So I think you just have to find the people you trust, and we have to do our job in traditional media. That's very important, that we manage to be balanced, nuanced, to let different sources speak their mind, to really do good journalism, and then do that in the hope that people actually come to us and trust us, and that they see some of those that we see out in the fringes on all sides, that people see them as what they is. But it's a huge challenge for the press. It's a huge challenge.
And far from me from being able to sort of critique this field, because again, it's really not my day job, but I just want to point out, because you said something about, people get angry on either side. I think that's a good thing that they get angry, because you've arisen something inside someone. What I have actually trouble with, and again, I can put someone who grew up in Europe, and then moved to the United States or England in between. Like I remember growing up in Denmark in the 1980s, you had Danmarks Radio. And over here you had NRK, right? One channel, that was the monopoly.
That's not good either.
That wasn't good either. But in the United States, news, here's the deal. I go to the channel that I think delivers what I want to hear. If I watch Fox News at 10 o'clock, Sean Hannity's of this world, whatever it is that comes on, or CNN's of this world, or the leftist MSNBC, different worlds out there.
And that's quite.
And that I don't think is healthy. But then again, what do? Do you have a state regulate that? Because in the United States, you got a constitution you have to overcome. Freedom of expression. So how do you do it? Norway, you will have a certain ways of going around that challenge. Whereas in a place like the United States, it would be difficult. So I don't know if there is a universal solution to some of the sort of mechanics of solving this. But my fundamental point is people getting angry, let them be angry.
I agree, but it's quite new in the United States. In the old days, it was 3 major TV networks. Everyone looked the same, evening news. And the difference between the United States and Norway is the United States, it's the elite who reads the newspapers. You could maybe get USA Today in the middle, but apart from that, it's the West Coast and East Coast. In Norway, we and the Japanese are the 2 people in the world who reads the most newspapers. And I think when you have a common understanding of reality, quite common reality, then it's easier. While in the US, they have just been going like that.
Right.
Which is a part of the tragedy with US
Right,
today,
right.
actually.
Absolutely.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like mainstream, like I'm trying to be very polite here, but I think we're out of time, so I'm just gonna say it.
Go on.
Like mainstream journalism is dying, and like we're dancing around the point that like journalists are becoming more and more, less and less relevant. What is becoming much more irrelevant, and that's not a disrespect on journalists. That is not to say I want them to be irrelevant, but I'm just saying if we have looked at Gaza over the last 3 years, and I think one of the main takeaways is how irrelevant mainstream media is. A bunch of misbehaved they-thems on college campus have been able to undo a whole ton of journalists, a whole ton of academias, like very young students on social media with a microphone, with a camera, with a platform. I had 3 followers on October 7th on Twitter. It was pathetic. I didn't do social media. And now I have like, between all my platforms, I have like hundreds of thousands of followers. It's like, it democratized access to media, and it made me able to deliver what I believe is a narrow and a missing voice from Gaza. But on the other hand, my concern, the catastrophe, is that I might have 92,000 followers on Twitter. Somebody who comes along and says, Hamas is wonderful, I love Sinwar, Israeli hostages are prisoners of war, he or she is going to have 500,000 followers, and he is going to say, and Zionism is settler colonialism, the discourse disappears. We're now having all of these young people in Harvard, in Yale, in the United States. You know how hard it is to get in Yale? You have students that showed up with Hamas head bandanas because a bunch of, like literally Hamas, the same Hamas head bandanas that they wore on October 7th, because university journalists, a journalist from the university said, let's get together and counter the Zionists. That's where I'm saying we have a serious catastrophe staring us in the eye. On the one hand, we could use it and use AI and use the power of that to democratize everybody in this room could have a voice. On the other hand, if some people here in this room decide to say, you know, those brown people, those Gazans, we need to exterminate them all, like we need to actually kill all, or say something horrible that then starts picking up traction, it's a double-edged sword, and we can't do anything about it.
Okay, so let's pray for the traditional media. And then final question. Where is the hope in this? 2 minutes, 1 minute for each of you. Where is the hope?
So I'm going to go back to my day job. Well, sorry for taking you back to Iran. My day job is, look, I have, as you heard, personally and both professionally been involved in this. I look at Iran and I see hope. And I think it's hard to see hope when you think about the Ayatollah's been there since almost 50 years. But I'll go back to 1906. The Iranian constitutional revolution happened 120 years ago. So I look at Iranian civil society. I look at a country with a deep sense of itself, over 5,000 years of continuous history, deep civilization, a lot of capacity, both in terms of natural, human talent, natural resources. Iran could be a top 20 economy in a short order with the right political setup. And that's the problem. They are stuck in a very bad place, but other countries, including countries in Europe, have in the past been bad and stuck, and they got themselves out of it. But I do want to say, if the Europeans, the Americans can help the Iranian people help themselves, that would be the ideal situation. So you avoid war, you avoid flows of refugees, and you see another country near Europe's borders, hopefully one day soon, going in a different direction, good for itself and good for the world.
My hope is that I say this with all due humility, I have, without, people say that the Zionists and the Jews are paying you. There's a hit piece about me that says Israel is paying me $30 million to promote genocide, and that I am sailing on a yacht that Israel bought for me to tweet crap about the pro-Palestine movement. I wish that were the truth. I really wish. But I can share with you humbly that with virtually no resources, with virtually just an endless drive and a desire, I was able to turn 3 followers on Twitter into a consistent building of not Ahmed is great, listen to Ahmed. Ahmed is irrelevant. I'm not the story. The story are the people of Gaza. The story are those who are suppressed, unrepresented, who are overlooked, who are inconvenient. When Gazans oppose Hamas, they're ignored. They're inconvenient. They're not part of the narrative. The narrative is either the resistance or Israel bad, everything is about Israel. When what I've built, which is this alternative way in which you can be pro-Palestine while holding multiple truths like empathy and loving kindness and sincere like horror for what happened on October 7th, the survivors of October 7th, the hostages, while not believing that the Jewish Israeli people have a right to safety and security, and that does not come at the expense of the Palestinian people's right to freedom and emancipation and independence and self-determination. This is, by the way, this isn't rocket science. This is like total, like basic stuff. So I feel that the evolution of journalism and media, we're talking about media, the evolution of media has allowed a non-journalist like myself to play a critical role in presenting an alternate narrative that now, 3 years later, more and more Arab and Muslim and Palestinian Americans are listening to. I am no longer seen as, oh, he's just, now people, as much as people used to think that I'm paid by the Israelis, I'm a Zionist, something, now they just say, well, you're a traitor, you suck, your views are horrible. So like I've proven my legitimacy. I've proven that I have skin in the game. I've proven that the people of Gaza who are against Hamas, who also suffered from Israel, have just as an important voice in this space, and that Gaza's future has to evolve beyond the resistance narrative, beyond the maximalist, totalitarian, overly simplistic views. And I see the potential, the promise of a new generation of young people, of journalists who were part of the traditional establishment, potentially creating something new, something different. But we must also guard against the risk that new entrants to the scene bring, because there are people who are grifters. There are people who are going to do this for personal gain, for money, etc. So I see this as being more on the positive side rather than on the negative.
So maybe more.
Thank
Thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation. It's a big topic. And you all did a great job, very interesting. Is there anybody here from NRK? Okay, because I actually tried to get Ahmed and Alex and all the other guests that our organizations has been bringing to Norway in the last, I would say, 5 years, to get these stories, the stories that we don't hear in the Norwegian.
Tell him he's a regular Iranian and I'm a regular pro-Palestine person.
We tried
I'm very regular, I swear. I'm regular.
So I think that all of you who are going back to your media, maybe there's nobody from media, but not my dad. Oh yes. We can all do a better job by including lived experiences from the region. The regular person in Tel Aviv who now needs for 3 years to run with his children, this is me, to a bomb shelter. We need also to have a place in the media, not only the extreme settler or the other extreme side. The lived experience need a place in the media, and I think we could all do a better job. So with that, on the optimistic note, you can follow our work at kosandchaos.org. We will continue this conversation. These guys are coming with us to Oslo on Friday, where we're going to have another debate or another conversation, which is called Future Middle East. We're going to bring there an Israeli, Mo Shani, and we want to tell other stories of the Middle East and how the Middle East potentially could look like. And we don't hear in the media. So follow that, and you're all welcome to come on tomorrow to our second panel. It's about anti-Semitism, which is a bit related to this topic. It's at 1:30, I think. Yeah, 1:30 at teltet. Samfunnsteltet. Kaos. And Friday at Røverstaden at 6 o'clock in Oslo. Thank you very much.